Mary had a little lamb.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Help is on the way.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Well, welcome to day 7 of the January 6th Select Committee hearings. This particular one and the one just before, these are hair-raising. The information is hair-raising. It is frightening, it is scary, and it happened. It's documented now, and it is the most amazing story I have ever heard told in American history. All right? So I'm just going to play it. I'm just going to keep on going. They've gone long. We haven't heard the testimony from the former white supremacists, Proud Boys, etc., but we will, so let's just listen in.
Call to fight. One of the first edits President Trump made to his speech was to incorporate his 5:05 p.m. tweet, revising his speech to say, "All of us are here today, do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore." He also added, "Together, we will stop the steal." President Trump's edits continued into the morning of January 6th. And as you can see from the president's daily diary here, the president spoke to his chief speechwriter, Stephen Miller, for over 25 minutes that morning. Following his call with Mr. Miller, President Trump inserted for the first time a line in his speech that said, quote, "And we will see whether Mike Pence enters history as a truly great and courageous leader. All he has to do is refer the illegally submitted electoral votes back to the states that were given false and fraudulent information where they want to recertify." No prior version of this speech had referenced Vice President Pence or his role during the joint session on January 6th. These last-minute edits by President Trump to his speech were part of the president's pressure campaign against his own vice president. But not everyone wanted these lines regarding the vice president included in the president's speech, including White House lawyer Eric Hirschman.
Did you ever speak to anybody in the White House at the time about this disagreement between the president and the vice president, other than the president, based on the objection from your counsel?
Maybe had a brief conversation about it with Eric Hirschman.
Tell me about that. What do you remember him saying to you about this disagreement?
I just remember him saying that that he had a I don't want to get this wrong. Sort of something to the effect of thinking that it would be counterproductive. I think he thought to discuss the matter publicly.
So it came up in the context of editing the president's speech on January the 6th?
It just came from the conversation where Eric knew it was in the speech, and so he had a sidebar with me about it.
And so the speechwriters took that advice and removed the lines about Vice President Pence. And later that morning at 11:20 a.m., President Trump had a phone call with the vice president. And as the committee detailed in an earlier hearing, that phone call was, by all accounts, tense and heated. During this call, the vice president told the president that he would not attempt to change the outcome of the election. In response, the president called the vice president of the United States a wimp and other derogatory words. As you can see in this email, after Vice President Pence told President Trump that he would not unilaterally deliver him a second term in office, the speechwriters were directed to reinsert the Mike Pence lines. Here is how one of the speechwriters described President Trump's last-minute change to the speech.
And as I recall, there was a very tough sentence about the vice president that was added.
President Trump wanted to use his speech to attack Vice President Pence in front of a crowd of thousands of angry supporters who had been led to believe the election was stolen. When President Trump arrived at the Ellipse to deliver his speech, he was still worked up from his call with Vice President Pence. And although Ivanka Trump would not say so, her chief of staff gave the committee some insight into the president's frustration.
been reported that you ultimately decided to attend the rally because you hoped that you would calm the president and keep the event on an even keel. Is that accurate?
No, I don't know who said that or where that came from.
What did she share with you about why it was concerning that her father was upset or agitated after that call with Vice President Pence in relation to the Ellipse rally? Why did that matter? Why did he have to be calmed down, I should say?
Well, she shared that he had called the vice president a not an expletive word. I think that bothered her, and I think she could tell based on the conversations and what was going on in the office that he was angry and upset, and people were providing misinformation. And she felt like she might be able to help calm this situation down, at least before he went on to stage.
The president did go on stage, and then he gave the speech that he wanted to give. It included the formal changes he had requested the night before and in that morning, but also many important last-minute ad-lib changes. A single scripted reference in the speech to Mike Pence became 8. A single scripted reference to rally-goers marching to the Capitol became 4, with President Trump ad-libbing that he would be joining the protesters at the Capitol. Added throughout his speech were references to fighting and the need for people to have courage and to be strong. The word peacefully was in the staff-written script and used only once. Here are some of these ad-lib changes that the president made to his speech.
Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. So I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do. And I hope he doesn't listen to the rhinos and the stupid people that he's listening to. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. But we're going to try and give our Republicans, the weak ones, because the strong ones don't need any of our help, we're going to try and give them the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country. So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue.
White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his deputy did not attend the speech, and they were concerned that the statements in the speech about the election were false. In fact, the message that President Trump delivered that day was built on a foundation of lies. He lied to his supporters that the election was stolen. He stoked their anger. He called for them to fight for him. He directed them to the U.S. Capitol. He told them he would join them, and his supporters believed him, and many headed towards the Capitol. As a result, people died. People were injured. Many of his supporters' lives will never be the same. President Trump's former campaign manager, Brad Parscale, recognized the impact of the speech immediately. And this is what he said on January 6 in excerpts from text messages to Katrina Pearson. Mr. Parscale said, quote, "This is about Trump pushing for uncertainty in our country, a sitting president asking for civil war." And then when he said, "This week I feel guilty for helping him win," Katrina Pearson responded, "You did what you felt right at the time, and therefore it was right." Mr. Parscale added, "Yeah, but a woman is dead. And yeah, if I was Trump and I knew my rhetoric killed someone." When Ms. Pearson replied, "It wasn't the rhetoric," Mr. Parscale said, "Katrina, yes, it was." Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. We're joined today by Mr. Jason Van Tavenhove and Mr. Stephen Ayers. Mr. Tatenhove is an artist and journalist. He's a former spokesman of the Oath Keepers and a former close associate of Elmer Stewart Rhodes, the founder and president of the Oath Keepers, who has been charged with seditious conspiracy in relation to the Capitol attack. Mr. Van Tatenhove broke with the Oath Keepers and has since spoken out forcefully against the violent group. Mr. Ayers is a former supporter of President Trump. He answered the president's call to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. He marched to the Capitol on the president's orders. He pleaded guilty last month to disorderly and disruptive conduct at the Capitol. Mr. Ayers, who no longer supports President Trump, came forward voluntarily to share his story as a warning. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. I recognize myself for questions. Today, we've discussed how President Trump summoned an angry mob of supporters to Washington, D.C., many of whom came prepared to do battle against police and politicians alike. We're fortunate enough to be joined by two witnesses who can help us understand who was in the mob that day. Both hardcore violent extremists like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and average Trump supporters swept up in the fervor of the day. Mr. Van Tatenhove, can you help us understand who the Oath Keepers are?
I can, thank you. My time with the Oath Keepers began back at Bundy Ranch with that first standoff when I went to cover them as an independent journalist. I then subsequently covered two more standoffs, the Sugar Pine Mine standoff and the White Hope Mine standoff. It was at that time that I was offered a job as national media director and an associate editor for the webpage. So I spent a few years with the Oath Keepers, and I can tell you that they may not like to call themselves a militia, but they are. They're a violent militia, and they are largely Stewart Rhodes. And I think, rather than try to use words, I think the best illustration for what the Oath Keepers are happened January 6th, when we saw that stacked military formation going up the stairs of our Capitol. I saw radicalization that started with my beginning of my time with them and continued over a period of time as the member base and who it was that Stewart Rhodes was courting drifted further and further right into the alt-right world, into white nationalists, and even straight up racists. And it came to a point where I could no longer continue to work for them. But the Oath Keepers are a dangerous militia that is in large part fed by the ego and drive of Stewart Rhodes, who at times seemed to see himself as this paramilitary leader. I think that drove a lot of it. So, in my opinion, the Oath Keepers are a very dangerous organization.
Well, thank you very much. You've talked a little bit about that danger. So, what is the Oath Keepers' vision for America, and why should Americans be concerned about it?
I think we saw a glimpse of what the vision of the Oath Keepers is on January 6th. It doesn't necessarily include the rule of law. It doesn't necessarily include, it includes violence. It includes trying to get their way through lies, through deceit, through intimidation, and through the perpetration of violence. The swaying of people who may not know better through lies and rhetoric and propaganda that can get swept up in these moments. And I'll admit I was swept up at one point as well, too. But I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, it does. And you talk about being swept up. So at what point did you break with the Oath Keepers?
There came a point, there were many red flags, and I probably should have broke with them much earlier than I did. But the straw that broke the camel's back really came when I walked into a grocery store. We were living up in the very remote town of Eureka, Montana, and there was a group of core members of the group of the Oath Keepers and some associates, and they were having a conversation at that public area where they were talking about how the Holocaust was not real. And that was, for me, something I just could not abide. And, you know, we were not wealthy people at all. We were barely surviving, and it didn't matter. I went home to my wife and my kids, and I told them that I've got to walk away at this point. I don't know how we're going to survive or where we're going to go or what we're going to do, but I just can no longer continue, and put in my resignation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ayers, there were many people in the crowd that day, January 6th, including you, who were not part of an extremist group. I'd like to start by having you tell the American people a little bit about yourself. Can you tell us about your life before January 6th?
Yeah, basically nothing but a family man and a working man. Worked at the company, a cabinet company up in Northeast Ohio for going on 20 years. You know, family's my life. I was a supervisor there, so that took up a lot of my other, a lot of my free time. Other than that, with my family, camping, playing basketball, playing games with my son.
Just what any ordinary American citizen, family man would do.
Yep, exactly.
So this committee has reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from January 6th. During this review, we identified you entering the Capitol as we see in this video. Mr. Ayers, why did you decide to come to Washington on January 6th?
For me personally, I was, pretty hardcore into the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I followed, President Trump, on all of the websites, he basically put out, come to Stop the Steal rally, and I felt like I needed to be down here.
So you basically learned about the rally on social media and at some point made a decision to come to Washington.
Yep. I had some friends I found out were coming down, and I just hopped on with them right at the tail end when I found out and came down here with them.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the vice chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any questions that she may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ayers, when you entered the Capitol last year, did you believe that the election had been stolen?
At that time, yeah. Everything that I was seeing online, I definitely believed that that's exactly what that was the case.
And when you heard from President Trump that the election was stolen, how did that make you feel?
Oh, I was very upset, as were most of his supporters. That's basically what got me to come down here.
And do you still believe the election was stolen?
Not so much now. I got away from all the social media when January 6th happened. Basically deleted it all. I started doing my own research and everything. And for me, for something like that to be that, for that to actually take place, it's too big. There's no way you can keep something like that quiet, as big as something like that. With all the lawsuits being shot down one after another, that was mainly what convinced me.
Well, and I think that's very important. And we've also talked about today and in previous hearings the extent to which the president himself was told that the election hadn't been stolen by his Justice Department, by his White House counsel, by his campaign. Would it have made a difference to you to know that President Trump himself had no evidence of widespread fraud?
Oh, definitely. You know, who knows? I may not have come down here then, you know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, earlier today we showed how Donald Trump's December 19th tweet summoned both extremist groups as well as rank and file supporters of President Trump to come to Washington, D.C., average Americans. He told them to, quote, be there, we'll be wild, and they came. We showed how how President Trump repeatedly told them, fight, 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 and they marched to the Capitol. Mr. Ayers, you were in that crowd at the rally, and then the crowd that marched to the Capitol. When you arrived on the ellipse that morning, were you planning on going to the Capitol?
No, we didn't actually plan to go down there. You know, we went basically to see the Stop the Steal rally, and that was it.
So why'd you decide to march to the Capitol?
Well, basically, you know, the president, you know, got everybody riled up, told everybody to head on down. So we basically were just following what he said.
After the president's speech, as you're marching down to the Capitol, how did you feel?
I was, you know, I'm angry, you know, after everything that was basically said in the speech. You know, a lot of the stuff he said, he already put out in tweets. I've already seen it and heard it before. So, I mean, I was already worked up, and so were most of the people there.
So as you started marching, did you think there was still a chance the election would be overturned?
Yeah, at that time I did, you know, because everybody was kind of like in the hope that, you know, Vice President Pence was not going to certify the election. You know, also the whole time on our way down there, we kept hearing about this big reveal I remember us talking about, and we kind of thought maybe that was it. So that hope was there.
Did you think that the president would be marching with you?
Yeah, I think everybody thought he was going to be coming down. You know, he said in his speech, you know, kind of like he's going to be there with us. So, I mean, I believed it.
I understand. We know that you illegally entered the Capitol that afternoon and then left the Capitol area later on. What made you decide to leave?
Basically, when President Trump put his tweet out, we literally left right after that come out. You know, to me, if he would have done that earlier in the day, 1:30, you know, we wouldn't be in this. Maybe we wouldn't be in this bad of a situation or something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Van Tatenhoff, in the run-up to January 6th, Stuart Rhodes publicly implored President Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, the 1807 law that allows the president to call up militias to put down a rebellion against the United States. And I want to get your thoughts about this in the context of your prior relationship with Stuart Rhodes. I understand that you had conversations with Rhodes about the Insurrection Act. Why was he so fixated on that, and what did he think it would enable the Oath Keepers to do?
Well, I think it gave him a sense of legitimacy, that it was a path forward to move forward with his goals and agendas. I think we need to quit mincing words and just talk about truths. And what it was going to be was an armed revolution. I mean, people died that day. Law enforcement officers died this day. There was a gallows set up in front of the Capitol. This could have been the spark that started a new civil war, and no one would have won there. That would have been good for no one. He was always looking for ways to legitimize what he was doing, whether by wrapping it in the trappings of it's not a militia, it's a community preparedness team. We're not a militia, we're an educational outreach group. It's a veteran support group. But again, we've got to stop with this dishonesty and the mincing of words and just call things for what they are. You know, he's a militia leader. He had these grand visions of being a paramilitary leader, and the Insurrection Act would have given him a path forward with that. You know, the fact that the president was communicating, whether directly or indirectly, messaging, you know, kind of that gave him the nod. And all I can do is thank the gods that things did not go any worse that day.
What did the Oath Keepers see in President Trump?
They saw a path forward that would have legitimacy. They saw opportunity, I think, in my opinion, to become a paramilitary force, you know?
Last week, the Department of Justice indicated that it has evidence of the Oath Keepers bringing not just firearms, but explosives to Washington ahead of January 6th. And the committee's also learned that Stuart Rhodes stopped to buy weapons on his way to Washington and shipped roughly $7,000 worth of tactical gear to a January 6th rally planner in Virginia before the attack. Did you ever hear Rhodes discuss committing violence against elected political leaders?
Yeah, I mean, that went back from the very beginning of my tenure. One of the first assignments that he brought to me wanting me to do as more of a graphic artist function was to create a deck of cards. You may remember back to the conflict in the Middle East where our own military created a deck of cards, which was a who's who of kind of the key players on the other side that they wanted to take out. And Stuart was very intrigued by that notion and influenced by it, I think. And he wanted me to create a deck of cards that would include different politicians, judges, including up to Hillary Clinton as the Queen of Hearts. This is a project that I refused to do. But from the very start, we saw that. There was always the push for military training, including there were courses in that community that went over explosives training. So, yeah, this all falls in line.
Mr. Van Tatenhoff, you say in your very thoughtful written testimony that we received today that you fear what the next election cycle will bring. And you also say that we have been exceedingly lucky in that we have not seen more bloodshed so far. I wonder if you would elaborate on those two statements.
I think as far as the luck goes, we've had the potential from Bundy Ranch on. I mean, being boots on the ground at these standoffs, and they were standoffs where there were firearms pointed across lines at federal law enforcement agencies, you know, whatever it may be with that particular standoff. But I think we've gotten exceedingly lucky that more bloodshed did not happen because the potential has been there from the start. And we got very lucky that the loss of life was, and as tragic as it is, that we saw on January 6th, the potential was so much more. Again, all we have to look at is the iconic images of that day with the gallows set up for Mike Pence, for the Vice President of the United States. You know, and I do fear for this next election cycle because who knows what that might bring. If a president that's willing to try to instill and encourage to whip up a civil war amongst his followers using lies and deceit and snake oil, and regardless of the human impact, what else is he going to do if he gets elected again? All bets are off at that point. And that's a scary notion. I have 3 daughters. I have a granddaughter. And I fear for the world that they will inherit if we do not start holding these people to account.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Van Tatenhoff. Mr. Ayers, I first want to ask you about what finally caused you to leave on January the 6th? We know that the medieval-style combat with our police, the occupation of the building, this was going on for several hours until the president issued at 4:17 a tweet, I believe, that included a video telling people to go home. Did you see that, and did that have any effect on what you were doing?
Well, when we were there, as soon as that come out, everybody started talking about it, and it seemed like it started to disperse, some of the crowd. Obviously, once we got back to the hotel room, we seen that it was still going on, but it definitely dispersed a lot of the crowd.
And did you leave at that point?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we left.
So, in other words, that was the key moment when you decided to leave, when President Trump told people to go home.
Yeah, yep. We left right when that come out.
You were not a member of an organized group like the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys, as most of the crowd wasn't. I wonder, on January 6th, was it your view that these far-right groups like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and Three Percenters and others were on your side? Did you have any reservations about marching with them and rallying with them?
Well, I definitely didn't have a problem. I was probably following them online myself. I thought, hey, they're on our team, good. That's how I kind of looked at it at the time. I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was a good thing.
I'm interested in hearing about what's happened to you since the events of January 6th. You told the vice chair that you no longer believe Trump's big lie about the election, but that's what brought you originally to Washington. Looking back on it now, how do you reflect on the role that you played in the crowd that day, and what is going on in your life?
Basically, I lost my job. Since this all happened, pretty much sold my house. So everything that happened with the charges, thank God, a lot of them did get dismissed because I was just holding my phone, but at the same time I was there. So I mean, it changed my life, and not for the good, definitely not for the, for the better. Yeah, I mean, that's all I could say.
President Trump is still promoting the big lie about the election. How does that make you feel?
It makes me mad because I was hanging on every word he was saying. Everything he was putting out, I was following it. I mean, if I was doing it, hundreds of thousands or millions of other people are doing it, or maybe even still doing it. It's like he just said about that. You got people still following and doing that. Who knows what the next election could come out? They could end up being down the same path we are right now. I mean, just don't know.
Mr. Ayers, I see that your wife has joined you today, and welcome to Washington. We know this has been very difficult on you both and your family. What lessons, finally, do you want the American people to learn from the way you and your family have suffered as a result of these events?
Biggest thing is I consider myself a family man, and I love my country. I don't think any one man is bigger than either one of those. I think that's what needs to be taken. People dive into the politics, and for me, I felt like I had, like horse blinders on. I was locked in the whole time. Biggest thing for me is take the blinders off, make sure you step back and see what's going on before it's too late.
Well, I want to thank you for your testimony and for appearing, both of you, today. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When Donald Trump sent out his tweet, he became the first president ever to call for a crowd to descend on the capital city to block the constitutional transfer of power. He set off an explosive chain reaction among his followers, but no one mobilized more quickly than the dangerous extremists that we've looked at today. Seizing upon his invitation to fight, they assembled their followers for an insurrectionary showdown against Congress and the vice president. On January 6th, Trump knew the crowd was angry. He knew the crowd was armed. He sent them to the Capitol anyway. You might imagine that our founders would have been shocked to learn that an American president would one day come to embrace and excuse political violence against our own institutions, or knowingly send an armed mob to attack the Capitol to usurp the will of the people. But you know, Mr. Chairman, the founders were pretty wise about certain things, and at the start of the Republic, they actually warned everyone about Donald Trump. Not by name, of course, but in the course of advising about the certain prospect that ambitious politicians would try to mobilize violent mobs to tear down our own institutions in service of their insatiable ambitions. In the very first Federalist paper, Alexander Hamilton observed that history teaches that opportunistic politicians who desire to rule at all costs will begin first as demagogues, pandering to the angry and malignant passions of the crowd, but then end up as tyrants, trampling the freedoms and the rights of the people. A violent insurrection to overturn an election is not an abstract thing, as we've heard. Hundreds of people were bloodied, injured, and wounded in the process, including more than 150 police officers, some of them sitting in this room today. I want to give you an update on one officer who was badly wounded in the attack and is well known to the members of this committee because he testified before us last year. Sergeant Aquilino Ganell is an Army veteran who spent a year on active combat duty in the Iraq War and then 16 years on the Capitol Force. Nothing he ever saw in combat in Iraq, he has said, prepared him for the insurrection, where he was savagely beaten, punched, pushed, kicked, shoved, stomped, and sprayed with chemical irritants, along with other officers, by members of a mob carrying hammers, knives, batons, and police shields taken by force, and wielding the American flag against police officers as a dangerous weapon. Last month, on June 28th, Sergeant Ganell's team of doctors told him that permanent injuries he has suffered to his left shoulder and right foot now make it impossible for him to continue as a police officer. He must leave policing for good and figure out the rest of his life. Sergeant Ganell, we wish you and your family all the best. We are here for you. We salute you for your valor, your eloquence, and your beautiful commitment to America. I wonder what former President Trump would say to someone like Sergeant Ganell, who must now go about remaking his life. I wonder if he could even understand what motivates a patriot like Sergeant Ganell. In his inaugural address, Trump introduced one commanding image: American carnage. Although that turn of phrase explained little about our country before he took office, it turned out to be an excellent prophecy of what his rage would come to visit on our people. Mr. Ayers just described how the trust he placed in President Trump as a camp follower derailed his life and nearly wrecked his reputation and his family. A few weeks ago, we heard Shay Moss and her mother, Ruby Freeman, Speaker Rusty Bowers from Arizona, and Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger describe how hate-filled intimidation campaigns by Trump and his followers made them prisoners in their homes and drove their stress and anxiety to soaring new heights when they refused to do Trump's bidding. American carnage, that's Donald Trump's true legacy. His desire to overthrow the people's election and seize the presidency interrupted the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history, nearly toppled the constitutional order, and brutalized hundreds and hundreds of people. The Watergate break-in was like a Cub Scout meeting compared to this assault on our people and our institutions. Mr. Chairman, these hearings have been significant for us and for millions of Americans, and our hearing next week will be a profound moment of reckoning for America. But the crucial thing is the next step. What this committee, what all of us will do to fortify our democracy against coups, political violence, and campaigns to steal elections away from the people. Unlike Mr. Ayers and Mr. Van Tatenhove, people who have recovered and evolved from their descent into the hell of fanaticism, Donald Trump has only expanded his big lie to cover January 6th itself. He asserts the insurrection was the real election, and the election was the real insurrection. He says his mob greeted our police officers on January 6th with hugs and kisses. He threatens to take one of America's two major political parties with him down the road to authoritarianism, and it is Abraham Lincoln's party, no less. The political scientists tell us that authoritarian parties have two essential features in common in history and around the world. They do not accept the results of democratic elections when they lose, and they embrace political violence as legitimate. And the problem of incitement to political violence has only grown more serious in the internet age, as we have just heard. But this is not the problem of one party, it is the problem of the whole country now. American democracy, Mr. Chairman, is a precious inheritance, something rare in the history of the world and even on earth today. Constitutional democracy is the silver frame, as Lincoln put it, upon which the golden apple of freedom rests. We need to defend both our democracy and our freedom with everything we have and declare that this American carnage ends here and now. In a world of resurgent authoritarianism and racism and anti-Semitism, let's all hang tough for American democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy, for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At one of our first hearings, Chairman Thompson explained that the members of this committee would not spend much time talking about ourselves. Rather, we would let the evidence play the leading role. And the chairman was right, because this isn't about promoting ourselves as individuals, it's about protecting the country we love. And it's about preserving what actually makes America great: the rule of law, free and fair elections, and the peaceful transfer of power from one elected leader to the next. But if I may say a word about myself and why I'm proud to serve on this committee. I'm the only member of this committee who was not blessed to be born an American. I was born in Vietnam after the Vietnam War, and my family and I fled a communist government and were rescued by the US Navy and were given sanctuary in America. My patriotism is rooted in my gratitude for America's grace and generosity. I love this country. On January 6th, 4 decades after my family fled a place where political power was seized through violence, I was in the United States Capitol, fleeing my fellow Americans. Members of the angry mob had been lied to by a president and the other powerful people who tried to convince them without evidence that the election had been stolen from them. Some of them then tried to use physical violence to overturn the outcome of a free and fair election. Our committee's overriding objective is to fight fiction with facts, to create a full account for the American people and for the historical record, to tell the truth of what happened and why it happened, to make recommendations so it never happens again, to defend our democracy. To me, there's nothing more patriotic than that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let me put what you have seen today in a broader context. At the very outset of our hearings, we described several elements of President Trump's multi-part plan to overturn the 2020 election. Our hearings have now covered all but one of those elements: an organized campaign to persuade millions of Americans of a falsehood that the 2020 election was stolen by widespread fraud, a corrupt effort to pressure Vice President Pence to refuse to count electoral votes, an effort to corrupt the U.S. Department of Justice, efforts to pressure state election officials and legislators to change state election results, a scheme to create and submit fake electoral slates from multiple states. And today, you saw how President Trump summoned a mob to Washington for January 6th, and then, knowing that that mob was armed, directed that mob to the United States Capitol. Every one of these elements of the planning for January 6th is an independently serious matter. They were all ultimately focused on overturning the election, and they all have one other thing in common. Donald Trump participated in each substantially and personally. He oversaw or directed the activity of those involved. Next week, we will return to January 6th itself. As we have shown in prior hearings, Donald Trump and his legal team, led by Rudy Giuliani, were working on January 6th to delay or halt Congress's counting of electoral votes. The mob attacking and invading the Capitol on that afternoon of January 6th was achieving that result. And for multiple hours, Donald Trump refused to intervene to stop it. He would not instruct the mob to leave or condemn the violence. He would not order them to evacuate the Capitol and disperse. The many pleas for help from Congress did no good. His staff insisted that President Trump call off the attack. He would not. Here are a few of the many things you will hear next week from Mr. Cipollone.
Is that right?
I was, and others were.
Okay. Was it necessary for you to continue to push for a statement directing people to leave all the way through that period of time until it was ultimately issued after?
I felt it was my obligation to continue to push for that, and others felt it was their obligation as well.
Would it have been possible at any moment for the president to walk down to the podium in the briefing room and talk to the nation at any time between when you first gave him that advice at 2 o'clock and 4:17 when the video statement went out? Would that have been possible?
Would it have been possible?
Yes.
Yes, it would have been possible.
And you will hear that Donald Trump never picked up the phone that day to order his administration to help. This is not ambiguous. He did not call the military. His Secretary of Defense received no order. He did not call his Attorney General. He did not talk to the Department of Homeland Security. Mike Pence did all of those things. Donald Trump did not. We will walk through the events of January 6th next week, minute by minute. And one more item. After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. In my opening, I mentioned how we look to our leaders to serve as a fail-safe if people in this country refuse to accept the results of an election. That's part of the way those in positions of public trust uphold their oath, how they show fidelity to the Constitution. In the run-up to January 6th, Donald Trump had an obligation to tell his supporters to accept the results of the election. Instead, he urged them to further along the path toward mob violence. The idea of mob violence makes me think of another sort of fail-safe. All across this country, there are different ideas about what role the federal government should play in our lives. In fact, up here on this dais, there are plenty of different ideas. But there are moments when the institutions of our federal government are the fail-safe. I am from a part of the country where, had it not been for the federal government and the Constitution, my parents and many more Americans like them would have continued to be treated as second-class citizens. The freedom to be able to vote without harassment, travel in relative safety, and dine and sleep where you choose is because we have a government that looks over the well-being of its citizens. This is especially important in moments of crisis. When we have a natural disaster that state governments can't handle on their own, when there's an emergency that requires action by our public health services or our military, we have a federal government. What happened on January 6, 2020 was another one of those moments in history that test the strength of our federal government. January 6th was an attack on our country. It was an attack on our democracy, on our Constitution. A sitting president with a violent mob trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power from one president to another. It still makes my blood boil to think of it. In a moment like that, what would you expect to see? You expect to see the President of the United States sitting behind a resolute desk in the Oval Office, assuring the American people that the attack would be repelled and the threat would be dealt with. You'd expect to be reassured that there was a fail-safe.
Wow. I have to tell you that hearing just implicated Donald Trump in witness tampering right at the end as well. This was the most amazing story of violence.
Mary had a little lamb.
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Help is on the way.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
One more item. After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously.
Okay, so that was the exclamation point at the end of an amazingly crazy sentence that was this hearing, right? She just straight up accused Donald Trump of witness tampering, just straight up accused him of being a criminal. That was powerful. That was an amazing, end to what was an unbelievable hearing having to do with the time period between December 14th, when the electors, first cast their ballots. Now, they were certified on January 6th, right? But we know that on December 14th, the electors had to cast their ballots. And so they took us today between December 14th through to January 6th. And it was a hair-raising, violent story of a conspiracy to, commit fraud against the United States, to stop a official proceeding of the government, which was the certification of the electors. And that was the seventh part of what was a 7-part plan to deprive the United States of their choice for the presidency of the United States of America. And so now we know some of the most awful things about our country. I mean, today, for some strange reason, during this presentation, I really felt nauseous. I really felt sick. I really felt sad and sick for my country. I really felt it today. I don't know if it was because of the normal, ordinary citizen from northeastern Ohio that testified, Mr. Ayers, whose life was completely ruined because he believed his president, because he wanted to believe his president, because he believed that something had been stolen from him. Stephen Ayers, worked as a cabinet maker apparently for 20 years in northeastern Ohio, or if it was Jason Van Taterhoff, who, was part of the Oath Keepers for years and years. And, back in the day, I used to interview Stuart Rhodes, and because his whole thing was exactly what Tatenhoff testified. Oh, it was all about the Constitution, and that any unconstitutional act that was committed by our government would produce a reaction from the Oath Keepers, who promised to keep the oath of constitutionality alive in the United States, and then just downshifted into, hey, I want to be a paramilitary violent leader. And you should consider me armed and dangerous. I don't know which of those two. Or was it before that when they took us through all of the crap that was going on inside the White House, making Sidney Powell a special counsel to the point where no one was sure, including the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, if she was made a special counsel? I mean, it was such an out of control administration. It was so crazy. It was so harebrained. It was so illegitimate and so full of snake oil and lies and schemes in order to maintain the presidency, in order to keep power, in order to become a dictator or an autocrat, and to overturn, not just an election, but everything about this democracy, to just blow it up, blow it off, say it doesn't matter. It's just an idea. I don't know, but the crap that was going on, that started with a crazy meeting. I mean, just bat crap crazy meeting on December 18th. There was a 6-hour meeting in the White House, 6 hours, and it went through till about right after midnight with Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and Michael Flynn and the president of the United States at the time. And Cassidy Hutchinson, who we heard from last hearing, was there, and she's texting to Pat Cipollone and others, Mr. Hirschman, the deputy White House counsel, that the White House has gone unhinged. That the White House, they're screaming, they're yelling, they're throwing epithets at each other. And all because Sidney Powell, who was not invited to the White House, Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn managed to get into the White House with a low-level staffer opening the door for them. Meaning there is no chief of staff. There is nobody in charge of the insane asylum, just Donald Trump. And they get in to see the president, and they begin to scream and yell about how the president needs to fight and how he needs to seize the voting machines and declare martial law and needs to take charge of this and whip the president into a frenzy about making Sidney Powell a special counsel to look into all of the accusations. And Hirschman and the others who are lawyers are saying, where is your evidence? Show us anything. You've already lost 60 court cases. Well, Powell says, all those judges, they were all against us. They were all in the tank. They were all corrupt. And Hirschman says to you had 61 cases. You're saying even the ones we appointed, even the judges we put in place, even our hand-picked judges, they were all corrupt. And she says, yes, they were all corrupt, all of them. And I want to be special counsel. And they're asking Pat Cipollone if Pat Cipollone had the authority to make her special counsel. And he says he does. And they asked Pat Cipollone whether or not he has the authority to give her a security clearance. And he says he does. Doesn't mean that he did it, but he's telling you today that they asked him that and he said he did. And so now Sidney Powell is walking around thinking that she thought she was appointed special counsel. Now, I don't know why it took Pat Cipollone this long to testify. He ain't no John Dean, I'll tell you that. But he's under subpoena. He is in a closed session last Friday. He's there for 8 hours. These are the clips that they play today to show us what went on at that deranged meeting on December 18th. 1:42 in the morning that night. It's now December 19th, 1:42 in the morning. But it's December 18th after this unhinged meeting. That's when Donald Trump tweets that everybody needs to come to Washington, that the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the Three Percenters and ordinary citizens and all the people who follow him, the millions and millions of people who follow him on social media, they all need to come to D.C. It will be wild on January 6th. People actually start changing their plans. They were going to be in Washington on Inauguration Day thinking something was going to happen on Inauguration Day. But now they got the word from the President of the United States that it's January 6th. That's the day. That's when he wants them there. That's when he needs them there. That's when they're going to have to fight like hell or they won't have a country anymore. And the president puts out this "Be there, it will be wild" tweet. And this is where the right-wing media picks up.
December 19th, the year is 2020, and one of the most historic events in American history has just taken place. President Trump, in the early morning hours today, tweeted that he wants the American people to march on Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021.
And now Donald Trump is calling on his supporters to descend on Washington, D.C. January 6th.
He is now calling on we, the people, to take action and to show our numbers.
I mean, this is what went on. This is what, and the Donald Trump is still perpetuating the big lie, still. And still witness tampering, obviously. That's what Liz Cheney just accused him of at the end of this explanation of what happened between the 14th of December and January 6th. And he's innocent, right?
Clear.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
The president has to plan for every eventuality because we cannot allow this election and the integrity of our election to go the way it is. I mean, this is just totally unsatisfactory. There's no way in the world that we are going to be able to move forward as a nation with this. So the president has and I just mentioned one of the options. I mean, he could immediately, on his order, seize every single one of these machines around the country on his order.
Oh my
God. He could order within the swing states, if he wanted to, he could take military capabilities and he could place them in those states and basically rerun an election in each of those states. I mean, it's not unprecedented. I mean, these people out there talking about martial law, it's like it's something that we've never done. Martial law has been instituted 64 times.
So that was our former National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, on Newsmax, after this crazy harebrained meeting, saying the president could seize the voting machines, the president could rerun the elections, the president could deploy the military, the president could declare martial law. And this was feeding into the whole Trump crowd. All of them, the normal people. That's why today, now I understand why they picked the two people that they picked to give an everyman accounting of what was going on in Trump world, right? So they picked Jason Van Tanehoff, who worked with, Stuart Rhodes for years and years as a propagandist for the Oath Keepers. And then they picked a very ordinary guy from northeastern Ohio named Stephen Ayers. And just to show you that the breadth and the depth of this kind of broadcasting, of this kind of propaganda, of this kind of lying, of this kind of insisting that something was stolen from you, was giving license to people to do violent things, whether they were an average ordinary Joe or they were looking all these years for an excuse to be a paramilitary leader and overturn the democracy that is the United States. I mean, these hearings have showed us everything. They showed us how this started, and it was just exactly the way it was presented to us at the beginning, that there were two coups. There was a bloodless attempt at a coup through the Department of Justice, but Bill Barr said, at the very end, December 23rd, right before Christmas, that's when Bill Barr resigned. That's when he had enough. That's when he said, okay, I'm out, right? And of course, he got his Amy Coney Barrett on there on the Supreme Court for the Dominionists. Cipollone is a Dominionist too. I just want you to know. They are Opus Dei members. They are part of this insanely right-wing strand of Catholicism. Okay, it's like there's all kinds of Judaism, there's all kinds of Christianity, there's all kinds of Catholicism, and their particular strand, their particular part of what they want to see happen to America is this Opus Dei vision of a Catholic nation. Okay. Anyway, after he got his picks on the Supreme Court, okay, I'm out. And now I'm going to say under oath, well, back then I told him it was bullcrap. I told him that he was wasting his time. I said it was bogus and that there was nothing to convince me that there was fraud or vote rigging by Dominion. I mean, it was backcrap and they were wasting their time. And I was saying, I don't know how far are they going to take this? I mean, how long are you going to insist that the election was stolen when the actual facts were that there was no fraud that would have changed the results of the election? And boy, I told him, if he really believes this stuff, he's lost contact with, he's detached from reality if he really believes this stuff. Remember that?
Barr again told the president that there was nothing to these claims on December 14th.
When I walked in, sat down, he went off on a monologue saying that there was now definitive evidence involving fraud through the Dominion machines. And a report had been prepared by a very reputable cybersecurity firm, which he identified as Allied Security Operations Group. And he held up the report, and then he asked that a copy of it be made for me. And while a copy was being made, he said, this is absolute proof that the Dominion machines were rigged. The report means that I'm going to have a second term. And then he gave me a copy of the report. And as he talked more and more about it, I sat there flipping through the report and looking through it. And to be frank, it looked very amateurish to me. Didn't have the credentials of the people involved, but I didn't see any real qualifications. And the statements were made very conclusory, like, these machines were designed to, engage in fraud or something to that effect, but I didn't see any supporting information for it. And I was somewhat demoralized because I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality if he really believes this stuff.
Yeah, so now he tells us, right? But he was still there. December 14th, he was there. The 15th, he was there. The 16th. The 18th is when this meeting is, this crazy 6-hour meeting. 19th is when the president puts out this tweet, be in D.C., it'll be wild. He's still there. Barr's still there. Now, Barr's been subpoenaed to testify for Dominion in the Dominion defamation lawsuit that's been brought against Sidney Powell and Fox News. $1.9 billion lawsuit for defamation of Dominion. And all, it's so amazing how, they'll stay there in order to, affirm their agenda, in order to get their agenda items ticked off their list, no matter what the cost to the American people are, no matter what the cost to America as a nation, as a country, as a democracy is, as long as they get their way, it's all okay. All right. So then he moves on from DOJ. He tries one more guy on DOJ. Remember Mr. Donahue, and he tells Donahue, listen, you don't need to see any evidence. All I want you to do is say that the Department of Justice has questions, and then leave the rest to me and the Republicans in the Congress. The Republicans in the Congress, right? This is what he tells them. I don't need you to say, that you have evidence. I just need you to say that you question it.
You also noted that Mr. Rosen said to Mr. Trump, quote, DOJ can't and won't snap its fingers and change the outcome of the election. How did the president respond to that, sir?
He responded very quickly and said, essentially, that's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm just asking you to do is just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
I mean, so now he tries one more person at DOJ, Mr. Donahue there, and then he says, we'll move the whole argument into Congress. Okay, we'll do that. He's got 147 members of the Republican Party who are with him on this big lie. But he wants to try to overturn the state results still, right? He wants to go and intimidate states. So he tries to intimidate state legislators. He tries to intimidate secretaries of state. He tries to get fake electors to be sent up to the Congress. So there's a question.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844.
561-270-3844.
After the last participants left the unhinged meeting, Trump sent out the tweet with his explosive invitation. Trump repeated his big lie and claimed it was, quote, statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election before calling for a big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there, will be wild. Trump supporters responded immediately. Women for America First, a pro-Trump organizing group, had previously applied for a rally permit for January 22nd and 23rd in Washington, D.C., several days after Joe Biden was to be inaugurated. But in the hours after the tweet, they moved their permit to January 6th, 2 weeks before. This rescheduling created the rally where Trump would eventually speak. The next day, Ali Alexander, leader of the Stop the Steal organization and a key mobilizer of Trump supporters, registered wildprotest.com, named after Trump's tweet. Wildprotest.com provided comprehensive information about numerous newly organized protest events in Washington. It included event times, places, speakers, and details on transportation to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, because Trump speaks in code, gangster mob code, and Ali Alexander and Stuart Rhodes and Enrique Tarrio and ordinary Americans understood the code. They understood exactly what Trump was telling them to do, and they did it, like immediately in real time, like buying websites and organizing and changing permit dates and applying for, a time at the ellipse, and organizing buses. You've got this Doug Mastriano creature running in Pennsylvania for governor, and he actually coordinated some of the buses to go to the Capitol to do the violence. I mean, this story is just, it's unbelievable. It's so detailed, and it's so maniacal, and it's so, it's like an insane man on a pathological mission to destroy his country, and everything that he did for months to create doubt about the election prior to the election. And he did it in 2016 too, right? He kept saying that, if he doesn't win against Hillary Clinton, then the election was rigged. And then he put that in his back pocket because, freaky as it is, he won. Then he pulls it out again in September ahead of the election and tells the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by at a debate that he's having with Chris Wallace, saying, what about these white supremacists? What about them? And he's like, what do you mean? Who are they? Who are you talking about? Give me a name. Give me a name. And he says, okay, Proud Boys. Proud Boys, stand back, stand by. And they tweet back at him, standing by, sir. Now, what you have to understand is Roger Stone is from Miami. Enrique Tarrio is from Miami. The Miami Republican Party is the Proud Boys. It is the Proud Boys. And this is all happening, in real time. Everybody's coordinating everything with everyone in order to get a violent day, in order to have as a failsafe, as a backstop, a violent protest, a violent revolution, a violent, shot heard around the world, a violent beginning to a violent civil war. If he can't have America, then nobody can. And that's where the bloody coup begins. It begins on December 18th in the Oval Office. It goes into the residence with, Giuliani and Flynn and Powell and all of them saying, we could get a mob. We could literally overthrow the certification, we can at least delay it. We can at least stop it. We can at least, create a constitutional crisis. That's our last play. Let's do it, because we lost in 60 damn courts. Lost. Make Sidney Powell some sort of special prosecutor. She'll rig, some investigation. And then while that's going on, we'll take the government. We'll take control. We'll take it by force. We'll take it by violence. That was the plan. That was the plan. And people understood what the plan was. Roger Stone understood what the plan was. Proud Boys understood what the plan was. Michael Flynn understood. Newsmax understood. Fox News understood. They all knew what the plan was. And that's why they're being sued. Almost all of them being sued for defamation against, at least there's a company that was defamed along the way. So there is a case to hold them accountable for at least, money damages. But this is a criminal RICO act. This is unbelievable, this story. And, we all sort of knew we are learning new things every hearing. There's no question about it. But we all knew what they were trying to do, and by they I mean Trump. We all knew that he was working his Department of Justice to say that there was something wrong with the election, to create doubt, to say, just like Bill Barr was willing to do with the Russia investigation, even though Russians were indicted, we just don't have authority over them. If we had jurisdiction over Russians and Russian troll farms in St. Petersburg, there would have been trials for them interfering in the election. But we don't have jurisdiction over Russians, okay? And so Russia instead said, yeah, you want a big FU? Yeah, so now we're going to invade Ukraine. This is what we're going to do to get back at you. Because you indicted, our guys, and it showed that they actually did interfere with your election in 2016. Okay, so now they're sitting around saying, all right, so the legal means, the machinations we went through with Department of Justice, the fake electors, the intimidation of secretaries of state in Georgia, the Arizona legislature. That's when, we heard Rusty Bowers, he testified that he kept asking Giuliani. I mean, he's such a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, the Speaker of the House in Arizona's state legislature, that he was kind of willing to hear them out, if they wanted to overturn or rerun the election in Arizona. Well, the Speaker of the House in Arizona was willing to give him a little, hearing. And so he actually had a meeting with Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and said, show me your evidence. Show me your evidence, because if you can show me evidence, maybe I can do something to help you out, right? Maybe I can. I don't know, but you have to show me something.
You will ask Mr. Giuliani for proof of these allegations of fraud that he was making?
On multiple occasions, yes.
And when you asked him for evidence of this fraud, what did he say?
He said that they did have proof, and I asked him, do you have names? For example, we have 200,000 illegal immigrants, some large number, 5,000 or 6,000 dead people, etc. And I said, do you have their names? Yes. Will you give them to me? Yes. The president interrupted and said, give the man what he needs, Rudy. He said, I will. And that happened on at least 2 occasions, that interchange in the conversation.
So Mr. Giuliani was claiming in the call that there were hundreds of thousands of undocumented people and thousands of dead people who had purportedly voted in the election?
Yes.
And you asked him for evidence of that?
I did.
And did you ever receive from him that evidence either during the call, after the call, or to this day?
Never.
But I mean, you had people that were willing to, speak up and speak out if there was fraud, if thousands of people who were dead voted.
It's the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
At this point, you may also recall testimony given in our earlier hearing by Acting Attorney General Richard Donahue, who said that the president asked the Department of Justice to, quote, just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. According to White House visitor logs obtained by the committee, members of Congress present at the White House on December 21st included Congressman Brian Babin, Andy Biggs, Matt Gaetz, Louis Gohmert, Paul Gosar, Andy Harris, Jody Heiss, Jim Jordan, and Scott Perry. Then Congresswoman-elect Marjorie Taylor Greene was also there. We heard testimony in an early hearing that a pardon was ultimately requested by Congressman Mo Brooks and other members of Congress who attended this meeting. We've asked witnesses what happened during the December 21st meeting, and we've learned that part of the discussion centered on the role of the vice president during the counting of the electoral votes.
So they named names today, and now we actually know what the Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Donahue, was referring to when he was, implored by the president to do. Hey, listen, we don't need you to overturn the results of anything. We just need you to create some sort of a doubt. We just need you to say we're looking into it, and then leave the rest to me and the Republicans in Congress. Now, we all sort of knew that Jim Jordan being on the committee was hysterical because Jim Jordan was a target of the investigation. But now we know for sure that there was a meeting at the White House on the 21st of December that was a private meeting with Congress in order to exert influence on Republicans in Congress to overturn the results of the election. This was all part of the bloodless coup. Now, when none of that worked, when the courts didn't produce for them, when the Supreme Court refused, when Paxton and his stupid, Supreme Court pass with, 12 states all signing on to, hey, let's look into the election, and all the secretaries of state said, I can't find you 11,870 votes, okay? Because there is no way to recalculate anything. The numbers are the numbers. When the state legislatures failed to do anything except maybe say, oh, you know what we could do? We could create a separate slate of electors. We could get some fake electors. Some of them will want to caveat it and say, well, we would be the legitimate electors if the results change to avoid prosecution. Others of them didn't even bother. They just said that they were the duly elected electors. They're all going to be facing some sort of charges. I don't know when, I don't know where, but all of this 18 months later is now demonstrably true. And when everything else failed because there were some decent people who took their oaths seriously enough to not play this dangerous Civil War game that the President of the United States was playing, he turned to the violent ones. He turned to the extremists. He turned to the mob. He turned to the most bizarre people in this country. The undereducated, the poorly educated, the people who live on Facebook, the people who live on Twitter, the people who watch Newsmax, who watch Fox News, who watch OAN, who watch right side media, who watch that broadcasting. All of those people, those crazy, crazy people who really want to think so poorly of America. Now, let me tell you how we got here. This goes way back to the Tea Party. Remember when we had the Tea Party? That was something that was created by Fat Denny Hastert. I mean, this was Virginia Thomas. This was Ginny Thomas's thing. And they started electing crazy people. They went out and found some of the world's worst candidates, and they got them elected. This is how we ended up with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and Andy Biggs. This is how we ended up with Matt Gaetz. This is how we ended up with Jim Jordan. This is how we ended up with Jody Heiss. This is how we ended up with these people. Okay? And now they're not done. They're still out there looking for the most lunatic, kooky, fringy people. If Herschel Walker wins a Senate seat in Georgia, then America has lost its mind. That man lies about his name, okay? He lies about his own children. He lies to his own staff. He lies about being a serviceman, stolen valor. He lies about being a law enforcement officer. He lies about being a law enforcement secret agent. He lies about his children. He lies about baby mamas. He lies about everything and anything. He makes crap up about evolution. He says the reason why China has dirty air is because the clean air blows from the United States to China, then China messes up the air, and then we have to go back and clean it again. Seriously? How is this possible? in this country that people would vote for somebody that does that thinks that says that dissembles like that can't think their way out of a paper bag. How do you get a Marjorie Taylor Greene? How do you get him that Getz, who's running some sort of a sex for money operation on his Venmo account? I mean, really? Because this is what they want. They want the dumbest, most blackmailable, most pliable, most malleable people with absolutely no core beliefs, no principles, no guiding principles, no true north. You get a whole government full of them, you don't need to do violence. Next election, it's a walk in the park. It's a day at the beach. Next election, you can overturn it. You can just pressure them. You could just tell them any bullcrap they want to hear, they need to hear, and they will rubber stamp it. And that's why everybody is telling you that this particular midterm is going to determine the next presidential election. Who's in charge? Who's the Secretary of State? Who's in charge of your House of Representatives in your state? Who's in charge? The Supreme Court is going to take up a case. Now, I just want you to understand that even though Trump failed, they don't care. They've moved on from him. There's a lot of Republicans that have moved on from their, Trump was a useful idiot. We're going to find another useful idiot. This one might be a little smarter. We don't know yet. It could be a DeSantis, could be somebody lesser, okay, than that. But when we pick somebody, trust me, that person is going to be willing to lie, cheat, and steal for us. For us. And what is us? What do we want? We don't want the American people to choose the president. We don't want the American people to choose government. We want to do away with government. We want to create a corporate environment. Corporations are going to rule the world. Everybody knows it, and we're going to do it in America. That's what we want. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make them lose their right to vote. We got a Supreme Court that we've paid for, that we've captured, and they will help us get there. They will help us. We also want privacy rights taken away for a whole host of reasons. Primarily, the people will be so busy raising 13 kids and, clawing back their rights that we're going to take away. They won't have time to notice what we're doing to democracy, what we're doing to their country. So we need some more idiots in there, people who will rubber stamp our agenda. And since 1980, they have told you they don't want everybody voting. They have had disdain for the American people forever. They have tried to turn you against your government, and when you wouldn't lose your patriotic fervor or your love of your country, when they couldn't beat it out of you, they decided that they would limit access to the ballot. And they're doing it. They are. All we got out of all of this Trumpism, is a Supreme Court that is willing to take away our right to vote and take away privacy rights. That's all we got out of it. That's what we got. That and 1 million dead from an epidemic. Okay, a pandemic. That's what we got. Now, I'll give you a little wiggle room on the pandemic and say, okay, well, nobody knew what they know now and blah, 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 and it's still going on. Okay, I'll give you that. But the voting, that became something legitimately attackable after the big lie. And even the so-called good guys in Georgia, the Raffenspergers and the Gabriel Sterlings, who said, this was not rigged, this was not fraud, this was not an election that needed to be, we hand counted 3 times. We did everything you wanted us to do. The numbers are the numbers. Nothing we can do, nothing to see, move along. But we will change the voting rules. We will. We can ban drop boxes in Minnesota. We could take away Wisconsin's right to drop it off. We can take away vote by mail. We could take, we can do that. We can make this work for us. And that's what we got out of it. And that's where we're going with it. This is dangerous. Next time, right?